Hey, hi, how's it going? Wilds of Talandre has been announced for March 6th. This is going to be a huge update for Throne and Liberty, raising the level cap up to 55, introducing a new tier of gear, which will be upgraded all the way to plus 12, and several other new ways that you're going to be able to progress your character. We have a little over a month to prepare for this, and there are many things we can do right now that are going to give us a huge boost to our progression when the update actually comes out. So if you don't follow this guide, you are totally screwed. No, I'm just kidding. There's going to be a lot in here, so just take it at your own pace. Just like with Tier 1, if you approach all of this casually, you still will be able to max out and be competitive eventually. It's just going to take you longer to get there. So, enjoy the game and don't burn yourself out. First thing we want to focus on is getting as much ore as possible, specifically Rubrix, Emeret, and Stalon ore. There are several things that this is going to be used for. First of all, in order to get our tier 2 gear all the way to plus 12, we're going to need hundreds of growth stones per piece. So one of the ingredients for these growth stones is going to be this precious ore. And then in addition to that, we have this new skill mastery system, which you can see on quest log. And some of these unlocks in the middle or these big ones at the end also cost a lot of ore, so you're going to want to save up for that. And then finally, when it comes to material transmutation, ores, especially the rare, so the blue tier ores, these can be very efficient in terms of maxing out your transmutation. We're going to have some extra tiers, tier 4 and tier 5 eventually, that will have tier 2 gear in them. They might also carry something called trait resonance fragments, which is just going to be another way to add more stats to your gear. And in Korea right now, the only way to get those fragments is from this system. They might change it for ours, but either way, these are going to be really valuable just because it'll allow you to gamble and potentially get more gear. So there really is no upper limit to how many of these ores is useful. More of them is always going to be better. Now, in order to get more of these, we're mostly going to be doing things that we've already been doing: run your instances, run your Abyssal dungeons, and run your contracts. When it comes to your contracts, I typically prioritize the Stalons, followed by the Emerets, followed by the Rubrix. This is kind of up to you. It depends on how many stones you're already working with. You might decide to prioritize the Rubrix, the red ones, for your weapons first if you are low on those and you want to make sure that your weapons are good to go. There is a pretty good chance that we will be able to get tier 2 weapons very early in the update. So if you're low on weapon stones in particular, you might want to focus on those. But in general, I like going after the Stalons and the Emirates because you need more of them in total, and because they all have the same value when it comes to transmutation. So just having a higher quantity of ores, regardless of the type, is going to be really useful. The exception to this is the blues. These are worth less than the other ores, so I would not go after these unless you're new to the game and you're still working on upgrading your skills. One quick piece of tinfoil here. In the announcement, they did say that we are getting tier 2 weapons and armor, and they use that phrase, that specific phrase, 2 different times in the video, so there is a chance that we will not even get T2 accessories on launch. I don't know how this would work. It seems unlikely, but it is just something to think about when deciding which of these materials to prioritize. You also want to make sure that you are buying the scrolls every week from the Sundries merchant. These allied resistance scrolls we'll talk about in a little bit, but the Tatal Tower scrolls specifically, these give you a lot of ore, and you should make sure that you run these. Don't ever forget to buy these. They're really valuable. Now, when it comes to the contract merchant, I would not buy any of the ores here. I think that they are not a good value. You should focus instead on buying your Mystic Keys, your Enchanted Ink, Extraction Stones, and maybe this Blessing Pouch. We'll talk about this a little bit more later. So a couple of tips here. Only upgrade your rare materials into precious materials as needed, or if you're out of space in the bank. This does cost a lot of Sollant, and this is going to add up over time. There's other materials that you're going to need to upgrade here as well. So don't be in a big rush here, or else you might spend all your Sollant too early. The other thing is that when it comes to material transmutation, the rare ores actually are more efficient in here than the precious ores. It's a 5-to-1 ratio, but the precious ones don't give you 5 times more points. They only give you like 4 times more. So if you do decide to use material transmutation, you're going to be happy that you kept a lot of these in their rare form. Now, when it does come time to upgrade your materials, it is very important that you upgrade the material first and then make the stone. Do not make blue stones and then upgrade blue stones into purple. If you already have some blue stones just because you happen to loot them from the Codex or the Battle Pass or something, then okay, that's fine. But do not craft blue stones with your materials. If you go this route, you will spend almost twice as much Sollant. It is one of the worst noob traps in the game. I do not know why it is like this, but it's very important that you upgrade the individual materials, so the powder, the crystal, and the ore, and then once those things are purple, you can craft your purple stones with the materials directly. So let's talk about those other materials. For polished crystal, the biggest thing is to just make sure that you're buying this out from the guild vendor every day. Other than that, you're going to get these crystals from doing the same content that you've already been doing. If you really want to go out of your way to farm more, then what people are doing is they are spamming the first boss in Tyrant's Isle, the little mini boss. Some builds are able to solo this. If you're having trouble, you might have to take a friend, but you just queue into the dungeon, you run over, kill the guy, he drops some crystals, you leave, and you do that over and over again. I am not personally doing this. It sounds way too boring. But if you're real down bad on polished crystals, or if you're just super bored and looking for something to farm, then that is an option. Also, you can get polished crystals from your contracts, but I think in the long run, the ore is going to be more valuable. The next big thing is going to be magic powder. So we're going to need 2 purple magic powder per weapon stone, and then 1 per armor stone, 1 per accessory stone. So in total, there's thousands of powder that we need. Right now, I've got about 2,000 that I can make, and I've got about 1K in the bank. So about 3K total. This is definitely the bottleneck for me. So this is something I'm going to be focusing on the next month, trying to get a couple thousand more of this so that I have some nice cushion going into T2. And you'll still be able to accumulate this after Talandre drops as well. Don't feel like you need all of this to be done by March 6th. It's not like you're going to get all your T2 gear on the first day. So you'll be able to keep accumulating this even after the update. So don't sweat it too much if you don't have like 5,000 powder ready. But of course, more is always going to be better. There's really only one way of getting large quantities of magic powder, and that is from dissolving gear. Now, if I dissolve a piece of gear by itself, it's only going to be worth 10 powder. If I dissolve a piece of gear that has been traded up, each additional trait on this thing is worth either 25 or 30 powder. It alternates back and forth. So that means before I dissolve this piece, I want to try to fill it up completely with traits. The best slots to do this with are generally going to be glove, helm, legs, boots, and weapons. Blue chest pieces are just a little bit too hard to come by, and when it comes to accessories, we're likely going to be using a lot of those drops to stack blessing. Getting blessing on those slots I just mentioned is very easy, so we can both build blessing and use those slots for magic powder. We'll talk about blessing a little bit more later on, but the biggest thing to note here is that when it comes to the purple versions of these, probably the only one that's viable is boots. You can get both the Shock Commander Sabatons and Ascended Guardian shoes from one rotation at Silius 6F, the Abominations. And boot is really the only slot that I've found that I've been reliably able to fill up the purples all the way in order to dissolve them. The other slots, I'm just not getting quite as much. So my strategy here mostly consists of dissolving blues, although I do go for purple boots in particular. Obviously, you're only doing this with items that are kind of like junk that aren't selling for a good price anyways. If you get a good drop, you don't want to use it for powder. You still want to try to sell it for lucent. Weapons give you twice as much powder as the rest of the items, and you might get enough purple items that you could smash together and dissolve. However, I would probably hold on to your purple weapons and throw them in the bank if you have room. The reason for this is because weapons also give you double points for material transmutation. We already talked about why material transmutation is going to be important, and so if we're going to stockpile something, the most like space efficient option for that is going to be purple weapons. So any extra purple weapons I have, I'm going to save for material transmutation in the bank, but any extra blues I have, I'm going to combine together and dissolve. There's one other source of magic powder that we need to talk about, which is of course Focus by Advanced. Those of you who have followed me for a while know all about this stuff. We're just going to take a scoop of that and mix it with water, and we get a delicious blend of caffeine, vitamins, and supplements, including alpha GPC, which is proven to help you concentrate, and L-theanine, which helps to reduce the caffeine jitters if you are prone to those. I've been partnered with Advanced for like 6 years. I love the flavors. I love the formula. I'm drinking the sour gummy worm right now, and I can highly recommend. If sour is not your thing, I can also definitely recommend Tiger Blood and Cherry Limeade. These have been 2 of my favorites over the years. Today until February 6th, you can use code MorlandTV40 to get 40% off your purchases. They only let me do this every once in a while, so take advantage of it while you can. And if you see this in the future, you can just use the regular Morland TV code for 10% off. Okay, so far the tips that we've covered are going to give you a huge boost in getting your gear to plus 12, and it's going to give you a huge boost to your material transmutation, whether that's gambling for more gear or whether that's getting those trait resonance fragments. The next big thing we want to cover is tier 2 traits. So there's going to be two parts of this, unlocking and upgrading. For unlocking, we want to lean as heavily as we can on these trait Unlockstones. And the reason for this is that simply when the update comes out, we're going to be wanting to sell as many of our drops as possible in those first few weeks to maximize Lucent. And so instead of having to use those drops to unlock my traits, I want to be able to sell those drops and use these Unlockstones. So in total, if I wanted to unlock everything, it's going to cost me like 3,000 to 4,000 of these. The trait Unlockstones for tier 2 cost twice as much as they do in tier 1. So I need as many of these as possible. Again, you don't need all of these on day one, but we do want to make as much progress between now and then as we can. So anytime there's an event going on, make sure you're buying them all from the event merchant, like the guy who is currently in Vienta Village. You can also get a lot of trait Unlockstones by filling in this lithograph book. A lot of the epic entries here will give you a good chunk of trait Unlockstones, plus some precious gems that you can vendor for a lot of Sollant, which is also going to be very important. Get as much of this weekly mission done as you can so you can claim the Unlockstones at the end of the week there. And then the biggest thing here is just try not to let your dungeon tokens cap out, and make sure that you're always choosing the random 1-star or random 2-star option. Both of these are going to give you dimensional shards. You can take these to the accessories crafter and turn in all of the T1 shards for a bundle of 3 stones and one of each of the T2 shards for a bundle of 5. So this is going to add up over time and end up giving you hundreds more Unlockstones. So that covers unlocking our traits. Now let's talk about tier 2 trait upgrading. So in tier 1, if I have a purple item that I want to upgrade, I can use a green trait, and that'll be a 1% chance. I can use blue, that'll be a 10% chance, and I can use purple, and that will be a 100% chance. In tier 2, all of this just slides up one tier. So now blue is going to be 1%, purple is going to be 10%, and tier 2 purple is going to be 100%. Again, we want to avoid using tier 2 pieces here as much as possible because we want to sell those and make Lucent. So the trick is going to be stacking as much blessing using blues and tier 1 purples as we can, so that when we get a T2 drop, that blessing is already filled in and we can just use regular purples and crank that 10% to 100% and just upgrade those traits much more cheaply. So we're going to keep this simple. There's really only one strategy you need to know to do this properly, and it's going to involve just a fresh purple piece that you haven't leveled up and haven't transferred. You can't use blue for this because if you go blue to purple, you're going to block yourself from being able to transfer it properly. So it has to be just a fresh purple item that hasn't been leveled up and still has this level transfer available. I'm then going to unlock the second and third traits on this. Preferably, I'm going to do this using other drops. So like hopefully I looted 2 or 3 swirling essence hats and I can get some of these unlocks for free. If I need to spend a little bit of Lucent to unlock these, then that's okay. But I don't want to spend too much here. The whole goal is to save Lucent. So maybe I'll spend like 30 or 40 Lucent to get a trait unlocked here. But my goal here is to spend as little as possible. And so the next step after we've got these unlocked is to just start feeding as many blues into this item as possible. I don't want to feed other purples. Feeding blues is going to net me more blessing. 90% of those blues are going to fail, which is going to give me 40 blessing each. And then 10% of them are going to succeed, which is fine. We want that too. We do want this item to fill up eventually, but we just want it to be really stacked first. So if I'm feeding dozens of blues into this thing over the next few weeks, then it's going to accumulate somewhere between 3,000 and 4,000 blessing before the traits fill up entirely. And by the way, if you're new to the game, you can just do this with your main gear. Like if you're still working on traits on your actual gear, then just use this strategy on the stuff you're wearing. You might not even need a placeholder. But for those of us who have been playing for a while, we're going to feed a bunch of blues into this. Ideally, it's going to be fully traded with a few thousand blessing when it comes time for us to transfer this into our T2. But before we transfer this into our T2, we take our current piece of gear. So my current helmet will transfer into this swirling essence hat. All the traits on my current helmet will get converted into 1300 blessing. And then all of the traits on this hat, when they go from tier 1 to tier 2, are worth twice that much. So it's going to be 2600 blessing. So all in all, I have about 4k blessing from the traits. And then I have 3 or 4k blessing that just got stacked up as I failed a bunch of blues. If I have blessing on my main gear already, like this helmet already has 2k blessing, then I can be a lot more relaxed with this. But basically, you total all that up and you end up with about 7,000 or 8,000 blessing on your tier 2 piece. You only need 8100 blessing in total. That's 9 upgrades that cost 900 blessing each. So if you only end up with like 7k, that's fine. You're 1 trait short. You'll still be able to farm more stuff in tier 2 and get yourself some blessing and finish that out. It's not a big deal. So just get a placeholder purple that you can unlock very cheaply or ideally for free using other drops, and then throw as many blues into that as you can. When tier 2 gets close, try to make sure that this item is fully traded. Transfer your current gear into the placeholder, and then transfer the placeholder into the tier 2. Don't stress too much about getting this perfect. Yes, it is a big boost, but it's not like you can't just get more of this later even after the expansion drops. Your tier 2 grinds is still going to be giving you lots of extra loot. It's going to be giving you lots of things that you can still use for a blessing. I've seen people suggest that you should use conversion stones to reset a trait so that you can stack even more blessing on it. My brother in Christ, do not use conversion stones in order to stack more blessing. Those conversion stones are worth way more than that blessing. Just like the Unlockstones, conversion stones are going to cost twice as much for tier 2. And on average, about half of the gear that you loot, that first trait is going to be something that you don't want, which means you're going to need these trait conversion stones to get rid of all those bad traits and replace them with something you want. So these are very, very valuable, far more valuable than getting an extra 1,000 or 2,000 blessing on your piece of gear. So just get what you can now, but don't obsess over this. The only caveat here is that if you're playing super casually and you're only going to be able to get, like 500 blessing on one of these items, then just don't bother with it at all. Just stick with your main gear, because that tier 1 to tier 2 transfer is worth twice as much blessing as normal. You only get to do that one time. So you want to make sure that the item that you're sending from tier 1 to tier 2 has as many traits filled in as possible. So don't use a purple that only has, like 3 or 4 traits on it. You want this thing to be at least more than half full for this to be worth doing at all. If you can't hit that, then don't even bother with placeholders. Just use your main gear and just catch up after the expansion. Now, as far as what items you want to use on this, a lot of it is just going to come down to chance. If you happen to get like several of these Visage of Executioners from your dungeon runs, and they all have different traits, then go ahead and just trait those together, use them to unlock, and that can be the piece that you stack on. If you are totally lost, here is a chart with sort of a good starting point for each piece. If you're looking for a purple item to go after, here are some good items and the locations that you can get them. This is only if you're stuck and don't already have purples that you can work with. For the most part, this is what you guys want to be focusing on, getting a high quantity of blues that you can feed into these items. Just make sure that the blue items that you're farming have at least 3 traits that actually match the placeholder item. You don't want a purple that's like health regen, melee evasion, melee endurance, while you're looting blues that are mana plus range and magic. You're going to notice that Sanctum Altar and 6F Abominations cover the majority of what we need here, so I would focus mainly on those 2 rotations first. And then just a quick note, the Umbra Staff that's mentioned here also drops from Sanctum Altar. I forgot to put it here, but both of these are going to be really good options that you'll loot while you are grinding either of these rotations. If you're not familiar with these rotations, the 6F Abomination rotation, you come down to this circle right here, kill all the ones at the bottom, take the stairs to this block, kill the ones here, go across, and then fly down and make a little triangle. You can do the same thing with this circle here, kill everything, and then come here and make a triangle. And then if your group is really zooming, you can combine these 2 rotations by flying between them from the high points. The Sanctum Altar rotation from the bottom teleporter here, we're going to just go down and right up these rocks, and we can avoid doing any puzzles or anything, and we get right up into where we need to be. This rotation is really nice because it is mostly Geos, Hydros, Trackers, and Guardians, plus the boss that spawns right here. And if you look through at the particular monsters that I just mentioned, you're going to see that it's really good coverage across a bunch of different slots. I've got a priority list here too. The higher priority ones are going to be easier and quicker to get done, so I would focus on those first. And overall, there's like a whole video's worth of information that's condensed here, so I'm going to be summarizing, but I do want to point out a few things. First of all, for Cloak, if you happen to loot Supreme Devotion from your random T1 runs, then there is a pretty good blue cape that you can farm and crypt that will match with that. If you don't happen to loot this, then I would probably just skip Cloak and set it to a low priority instead. There is an epic cloak that drops from Crypt, the Tapestry Mantle, but the traits don't really line up well with the blue cloak, so it's not a great option for stacking Blessing. And then for chest, there's really no consistent blue chest drops anywhere in any of the Abyssal dungeons, so I would probably skip chest entirely. For necklace, the only really good option is Clasp of the Conqueror, which is going to cost you Abyss coins. Now, these are still selling pretty well, so if you get a good trait here, then you can still make some Lucent, and if you get the bad traits, then you can use these for blessing stacking. 2 out of 3 of these junk traits match with the traits that drop from the 6F Abomination necklace, so it's a pretty good option there. But if you would rather save your Abyss coins for tier 2, that is also viable. There is a chance that we will get a new Abyss box that has tier 2 gear in it, but you'll be able to spend the current coins on that. We don't know for sure, but it is an option, so if you would rather go for that, then you can just ignore necklace. Unfortunately, the other necklaces are just too expensive, or they have traits that don't line up well with our blue item grind. Remember that for weapon and for rings, you have 2 weapons that you're going to need to be upgrading and 2 rings that you're going to need to be upgrading. So you're going to need separate placeholder items to hold the blessing for your first ring, and for your second ring you're going to need separate placeholders for your first weapon and your second weapon. Luckily for ring, there is a pretty easy way actually to get blessing. We want to use the dimensional essences that we get from running our random 1 stars. On average, if I'm keeping up with my token grind, I'm going to get about 1 or 2 of these essences per week. Again, if they come with a good trait, I can sell that for Lucent. If they come with a junk trait, then I can use that to stack blessing. And the rings that drop at the 6F Abomination rotation match with the Amber or the Sapphire band perfectly. So it doesn't matter which one you use, Amber or Sapphire, just once you pick one, stick with it. If you pick Amber, then keep picking Amber so that you can use it to continue unlocking traits. Now, when you're doing all this Abyssal grind, you have a choice between 2 different miscellaneous foods. You've got the Sollant bonus or the Mastery bonus. Highly recommend that you guys always run the Sollant bonus. Try, first of all, not to forget to do this. Make sure it's always on when you're doing Abyssal grinding. And I think you should pick Sollant over Mastery for several reasons. First of all, I just think it's going to be more valuable in Tier 2. If you run a bunch of Mastery food over the next few weeks, then you might get a couple extra Mastery levels. But in the long run, it's not going to matter much. You can grind Mastery in Tier 2 pretty easily under the new system. And with Sollant, you know, if you run this every time you're doing your Abyssal grind over the next few weeks, that's tens of millions of extra Sollant. That's going to have a much bigger impact. Additionally, there is about to be an event from February 13th to 27th where there is a 20% extra Sollant bonus just on all the time, but there's a 50% extra Mastery bonus. So you're already going to be getting a lot of Mastery during that time period. And if you really want to min-max that, you can try to get your Abyssal tokens close to capped out at 40k like the day before that event starts, and then you'll have a lot to burn throughout the event. So since we're getting a lot of Mastery anyways, it's going to be better to focus on Sollant, and that also applies in the Battle Pass Star Shop. These abundance fruits here are really nice. They last an hour. And if you save up like 30,000 tokens, you can burn all of those in a single hour at the 6F Abomination rotation. Very efficient spot to use your Fruit of Abundance. Some other stuff that we want to buy here before the Battle Pass ends. The Contract Token 2, these are used for your 2-star dungeons. There is a chance that there will be Tier 2 loot added to these. And since they don't expire till March 13th, we can buy these now and then save them until after the expansion drops. Same with Resistance contracts and Abyssal contract tokens. There's going to be new content for both of these in Talandre, so these are going to be nice and valuable, and again, we can use them after March 6th. If you've been staying on top of your Battle Pass, you should have enough points to clean out all 3 of these things and get a few Fruit of Abundance, depending on how actively you're going to be grinding those. And then if you still have some Star Crystals left over, I think these Trait Conversion Stones are going to be a very good value. And then if you still have some left over after that, I would probably go for the Trait Extraction Stones. As far as all this other stuff, as much as I want some more runes or some more Unlockstones, I just think it's too expensive here. And then the Sollant here is just not going to be nearly as much as what I would get from an Abundance Fruit, as long as I make the most of this buff. So now we come to the question of whether or not to save these blue contracts, and there's some really good reasons to save these, there's some really good reasons not to save these. So first and foremost, when you are shopping at the contract merchant, you still want to be buying your Mystic Keys every single day. These are a really good value, and you want to be buying the Enchanted Ink and the Trait Extraction Stones every week. In Tier 2, everything costs twice as much, so it's 50 Extraction Stones per trait, and for lithographs, it's going to be 50 ink for armor and accessory, and 100 ink for weapon. So these things are going to go really fast if you're trying to sell gear and make money in Tier 2, which means we really want to make sure we're buying these out every single week as much as possible. If the end of the week is almost here and you cannot afford these, then you need to get some more contract coins, which means you need to run some of these blue scrolls, even if you're trying to save them. But in general, as long as you have enough coins to buy those 3 things that we just talked about, then you can choose to save these scrolls for tier 2 if you want. They're going to convert at a 2-to-1 ratio, meaning if I have 100 of these current scrolls, I'm only going to end up with 50 Talandre scrolls. The Talandre scrolls give a little bit more coins, but not much, so I'm basically going to end up with half as many contract coins. I'm going to end up with half as many growth stones, but those new scrolls do have like a 7 or 8% chance to give me a piece of tier 2 gear, which is really nice. So if you want those chances of that new gear, then save your scrolls. If you'd rather have more growth stones and more contract coins, then keep running them now. You'll also get those Abyss coins, which you can either save or you can use them on, Clasp of the Conqueror like we talked about earlier. Not to mention, you just get a bunch of gear from these overall. So that's gear that you can use for blessing. You might get lucky and get some traits that you can sell for Lucent in addition to the things that you're buying with Abyss coins. So it's really not a bad value to keep running these. And one other reason why you might want to keep running these is that there is a possibility on Talandre launch that there is a new box that gets added into here that costs 3,000 coins and gives you the option to select tier 2 weapons. If you want to buy one of these boxes or 2 of these boxes, then the best way to do that is going to be maximizing your contract coins, which means running the scrolls now and not saving them. So I can't fully tell you what to do here. It kind of depends on your situation. How badly do you need growth stones? Would you rather have that guaranteed weapon box, which again isn't really guaranteed because we don't know for sure if we're going to get it. But assuming we get it, you could spend the coins and get the weapon for sure. Or would you rather run the new scrolls, get the new Abyss coins, have a 7 or 8% chance per scroll that you get a new piece of T2 gear? There's definitely value in both directions. Personally, I feel pretty good about how many growth stones I have, and I feel pretty good about how much blessing stacking I've already gotten finished. I don't feel like I need to do a ton more farming in tier 1, so I'm just going to buy those keys, extraction stones, and ink, and then I'm probably going to be saving the rest myself. Last thing on this is that there is going to be an activity reset after server merges. So if you're in a competitive guild that wants to push activity for boonstones and siege and that sort of thing, then having a large quantity of these scrolls to run when it comes time to lock in the new activity rankings will also be a really big deal. Don't forget about the Ornate coin shop. There are a lot of good things you can get here. You want to buy out all these blessing pouches. These are still a really good value. All of the precious growth stones are probably worth getting as well, depending on where your stockpile is at. And even if you have a good stockpile of ore, you probably still want to buy these just because, more growth stones mean you can save that ore and use it for other stuff. If you're still working on skills, these skill books are really good value. Don't buy any of these blues. These are all a ripoff. They're all a bad ratio compared to the purples. But the purple stuff here is all good. The blessing pouches are really good. And then after that, I usually go for the enchanted ink. This is a slightly better value than the extraction stones. If you are really low on extraction stones and you need some of these, then you kind of buy these as needed. But I usually try to clean out the enchanted ink every time there is an Ornate coin shop reset. We had a reset that just happened, and there's going to be another reset right at the beginning of March. So keep an eye on that at the beginning of the month when that rolls over. When it comes to these precious gems here, the Emeret and the Rubrix are probably going to go up in price. People are going to be desperate for Sollant, so they're going to be buying these Emerets in order to vendor them for 430k each. And then Rubrix are just hard to come by. You need a lot of these if you're going to lithograph a weapon. Some people might be buying them if they're desperate for weapon growth stones. Just if you look at the KR market, these really held their value, whereas the Emerets and Stalons kind of went down over time. Now, this is just speculation, but I don't think the Emerets and Stalons are going to go down right away. In fact, there might be a brief spike in price because people are going to need a lot of these in order to make lithographs. So it's kind of up to you what you want to do here. I would save at least 25 to 50 of these just in case you need them for your lithographs and the prices do spike. And I would save all of your Emerets and Rubrix. I think there's a really good chance that these two in particular are going to gain value, at least in the early days of the expansion. Don't forget about raw materials for your lithographs too. If you are low on raw materials, you can buy these material selection chests from the guild vendor. These are pretty cheap, pretty decent value if you need more of this stuff. And don't forget about your Amatoi expeditions as well. The Abyssal tokens, the raw materials, and the cooking mats, all of these things add up over time. Eventually, there's going to be a new tier of Rune, Probably this won't come out on the first day of Talandre, but I think it's still a good idea to start stockpiling your Rune Fragments anyways. Not only are the new boxes very expensive in the future, but the current boxes that we have cost a lot of Sollant, and I just don't think this is the best way to be spending your Sollant right now. You know, this was good maybe a month or two ago, but at this point in the game, you really should be saving most of your Sollant for tier 2. Everything is going to be really expensive, so don't be making these chests. Save your Rune Fragments, and eventually these will come back and be useful in the future. Now, when it comes to the arena coins, this one's kind of tricky. Korea still doesn't have these icy necklaces. This is something we only got in our version. I don't know if there's going to be tier 2 gear that only ends up in our version, so I'm just saving all my arena coins for the assumption that in the future there will be some kind of tier 2 gear in here. Like I said, Korea doesn't have any, so maybe that won't pay off. They do have higher level rune chests, which I don't think are a great value, and they have the new tier 2 blessing pouch in here for 3 coins, so you know, you could spend your coins on that. Any direction that you go here is kind of a gamble. Some of these things are still worth money right now, so you know, if you want to take a chance that you get a good trait on one of these, then you could potentially go for that. The price of these bracelets in Korea is only 3 rather than 9, but if we get that same price decrease, then they're going to be worth a lot less Lucent as well. So it's hard to say how all that's going to pan out. It's really anyone's guess. Like I said, I'm saving these for the really long haul, assuming that there will be 2-tier gear in here someday, but that's total speculation. If you want to cash out now, then maybe just gamble on some of these bracelets and hope that you get lucky. Or, you know, maybe on day 1, if they get reduced in cost, you can try to buy a few and sneak them onto the market before the prices crash. When you're doing your random dungeons, this 2-star random reward that you get at the end of the run, you don't need to open this right now. Save this until after Talandre. First of all, you shouldn't be using Unlockstones on any tier 1 gear anymore anyways. You should be saving all those for tier 2, so you don't need these at the moment. And there's a chance that that 12-star soul shard at the bottom gets changed into the tier 2 dimensional essence, which you can use to craft weapons. So I would just hold on to all of these. It's a long shot, but you might be able to open these after the patch and get that new drop. And even if it doesn't work out, like I said, you don't need to open these right now anyways, so there's no real risk. The 1-stars, however, though, you should be opening these. All of the value that you're going to get from these is right now. You want those dimensional essence salvations. You want to be turning those into rings, either to sell or to make blessing. And then my final piece of advice for you guys is play around on Questlog a little bit before the update comes out. There is so much new gear. You're not going to be able to figure this stuff out on the fly. You want to be kind of familiar with some of the gear that's going to drop. You want to be familiar with what trait resonance is and the different stats that are going to be available there. There's a million different variables here, and so it's a good time now to start playing around with this stuff. Look at what other people are building. Maybe find some builds that you trust, that you can follow, or that you can start to iterate on, because if you just start thinking about your build on the first day of Talandre, you're going to be super overwhelmed. There's just way too many things to consider. I've got one of Revic's builds up on the screen right now. He's going to be one of the best people to follow for melee builds, and then I'll be putting up some builds of my own as we get closer to the actual expansion. Thank you guys so much for watching. Big shout out to all the channel members that are on the screen. I'm going to be doing a subathon today for a new game called Kingdom Come Deliverance 2. The first one was awesome. I think we're going to have a lot of fun. So stop by the stream either here on YouTube or over on Twitch if you want to check that out. Don't forget to use code MorlandTV40 for 40% off of Focus by Advanced over the next couple days. I will put a link in the description. Appreciate you guys. See you next time.